Now we're going to look at wages and wealth in general and really want to go through a lot of this in more detail because there's a lot of caveats that essentially fit into this. So what are those caveats? How are those caveats going to be? What does that mean in general? And that's when we look at wages. So here's where we look at the U.S. middle class now holds a smaller share of wealth than the top 1%. Middle 60% of households by income have combined assets at 26.6% of national wealth as of June, lowest going back 3 decades. The top 1% are at 27%. So when you look at what the middle 60%, so really your growth engine of consumer spending continues to whittle down, while you have the ultra rich, but as people start to get concerned or remain concerned on, well, where are wages going to be? If our wages keeping up? If they're not keeping up, how, maybe, okay, I have some additional savings due to government transfers. Am I willing to spend it, or am I going to sit on it longer because I don't know what's going to happen going forward as prices every week, it seems, go up another 10 cents? It becomes this overhang and this what's the right way to put it? This, you become frozen. And I think that's what you're starting to see. Again, it's always gradual. There's never a point where you're like, oh, see, there it is. It's like, okay, well, there's a little bit here, a little crack there. And then all of a sudden it comes all at once. You're like, oh, there's that what we were expecting and what we've been talking about. There's always pockets of regional strength, just given where is money flowing. Are people traveling from New York to Tennessee, New York to Florida, New York to Texas, California to Texas? When you're looking at these shifts, you're seeing a fall in some and a rise in others as people try to stretch their dollar and go to a place that has a lower cost of living due to just the inherent costs that continue to rise while wages remain flat. So let's look at this differently. So let's look at core personal income. So the nominal side has continued to go up, but the real side has been flat. And that's the biggest side of the underlying problem when you look at core personal income. And you're actually starting to see it curve down, not up, just because inflation is outpacing to the upside. And that's where we continue to see a lot of these pressure points and a lot of these issues that are just accelerating and causing these broader overhangs. So again, this is something that's going to take time to show up because you still have some of that excess savings. A lot of it has been used, but you still have some. And you had back to school, and now you have Christmas shopping. And let's be fair, it's been a pretty terrible couple of years, so people are going to go a little bit higher than on spending for Christmas. But also be clear, value versus volume. The value of those Christmas goods are now more expensive. So even though volume could go down, the value could go up just because things cost more. So then when we look at savings, here's where as of March, which as we know has continued to come down as we've shown, but just taking Fed Reserve data, this circle here has come down over that time period, where when you look at the top 20%, that's where we've also seen this start to shrink and roll over. But the 1/3 of excess savings among bottom 80% is at $800 billion, but we've seen that now come down to about $26 billion. So you see where we were in March and where we are now and how it's already started to come down. Now, it's still elevated at the top, so you're not going to see this huge drop in this number, and some of that is being stuck, but now you have rent going up. You have food continuing to rise at a 60-year high when you factor in inflation, continuing to put this pressure, and again, making people feel a bit poorer. You're going to react differently when your savings is at one level versus another. And these are some of those pressure points. It's just, did we get there yet? And what is that number? And those are some of those little things that continue to plague the system. And then when you look at some leading indicators, the Philly Fed's Regional Manufacturing Survey leads the broader ISM index, and right now it is flashing a significant drop in early 2022, again, pulling things down as we go through, again, that Q4 into Q1, we continue to see this perpetual slowdown after seeing some of that peak. And now we're starting to see that drop, which again is going to match up well with where we see the consumer over that time period. But understand that when you look at U.S. average hourly earnings, it's still going up. And that's where it's, what is it, the average hourly and then the real side. And that's where you're seeing that pivot, because this makes it look pretty good. Hey, we're up, we're higher. But then once you factor in inflation and what that means at a basket level, it's actually firmly below and not at that pre-pandemic level prior to. And how are things changing though? So this is when we start getting into some of this demand profiles. So working from home exceeded expectations. Relative to expectations, how was work from home turned out? So 20% said hugely better, substantially better said 22.3%, better said about 19%, about the same 25%. So essentially over 75% of the people said it's either the same as going to the office or better. So again, that's not to say everybody can go in, because they can't, but you're starting to see some of that. Well, what is that flexible schedule? So over 1/3 expect that 40% or more of their employees will work primarily remotely post-pandemic. So the question is, what is going to be that now going forward? And this is where we get that flexible schedule, which again is going to mitigate some of that weekday travel. If I can work from home, if I can be flexible, that's going to allow some of that post-pandemic adjustment. Now, people have moved into the suburbs. People have moved a bit further out. So when you do drive, you will be consuming more, but you're going to be doing it less. So again, there's some of that washing out, where even though you're further away from the point in time, you're still not right where you were. But again, you're just going to travel 2 days a week instead of 5. Then when we take this and say, let's look at credit. So when you look at non-revolving consumer credit owned and securitized, it continued to move higher, while revolving consumer credit owned and securitized came down. And now it's starting to come back up, but commercial bank interest rate on credit card plans is back to near all-time highs. So think about, we have rates at negligible, and now you have rates back at over 17%, 17.5% on credit cards. So just think about for those that have been following some of these bank earnings, here's an example of where you're making some of this money as people continue to obviously borrow against their credit cards and rates continue to move up, as we're starting to see this increase in recovery and revolving credit, still well off of peak, but again, starting to see that recovery as savings get dwindled, people turn to credit again. And that's where another kind of signal of where is savings and where spending. And that's where you're starting to see some of that savings either stay there and they're just going to use more of the credit card, or the savings are gone and they're back to spending an elevated amount on their credit card. But when you look at what people are searching for, consumer credit interest is going higher. So what do we have? We still have rates near lows. You still have some great opportunities as the Goldman Sachs financial ease versus difficulty of getting. We have still some of the easiest money ever in our history. So why not take advantage? And that you're still seeing people, but now you're starting to see that accelerate as savings go down. So again, savings are coming down as cash advance searches are going up. You're starting to see an increase in personal loans. You're starting to see these increases because they're like, all right, well, my savings are going down. Money's still cheap, so let me go get some before it goes away. And that's where you're starting to see some of this, that next wave of spending, or where those next dollars are going to come from, and they're more expensive. So then when you look at merchant wholesaler on the durable goods inventory to sales ratio, we're coming off the bottom. And this is what we've been talking about, and one of those early signs of softening consumer demand, and as well as some supply chain catch up, is inventories start to increase. So now this can go two different ways. You can have inventories going up, or sales going down, or both. And in this case, we have both. So you have sales coming down a bit, and you have inventory coming up, which again is moving this ratio to a still at very low levels, but you're starting to see some of that rebuild, which will offset some of the loss in consumer spending, because you have industries that are going to look to try to make up what they've lost. So then when you take all of that and look at sticky price CPI, you can see just where we sit on that sticky price side, sitting here at this very elevated level of near 15%. You have core sticky CPI right kind of flatlining here with flexible at these elevated levels. And you're just, the flexible CPI and the core flexible CPI just sitting at these elevated levels, again, pulling things higher. So the Atlanta Fed Sticky Price Consumer Price Index, a weighted basket of items that change price relatively slowly, increased 4% on an annualized basis in September, following a 2.6% increase in August. On a year-over-year basis, the series is up 2.8%. On a core basis, excluding food and energy, the sticky price index increased 3.8% in September, and its 12% change was 2.7%. The flexible cut of the CPI, a weighted basket of items that change price relatively frequently, increased 8.4% annualized in September and is up 13.5% on a year-over-year basis. Again, all of this is draining and pulling out these savings, impacting these wages. So if wages are up 20%, if wages are up on the lowest end 20%, and then on the top three quartiles, they're down 5%, well, some people will be able to manage it, but then the others won't. And the question is, who has the most discretionary income? And it's always been the middle to upper class, and then obviously the 1%. But that middle to upper class were always that kind of driving force for spending. Now, how much of that can be made up with the lower end? And when you look at that against real wages, you can see they're still not keeping up with inflation, which will continue to be a bigger issue. And here's looking at used cars and airfare hotels and car rentals versus core. So core, excluding used cars, airfare hotels and car rentals, continued to go up, which again, driven by shelter, with shelter being the biggest component of it, which is going to again, keep us elevated and pulling us higher, hurting what those increase in wages are, because it's going to go to rent. So then when we look at this a little bit differently, when you look at rent and plus OER, which is the owner's equivalent rent, and then when you look at others as well as new vehicles, you're seeing a lot of this movement. While there was actually a drag that was created by apparel, that was created by airline fares, used car prices, which have then since reversed. So there's still, again, more coming up as some of this has continued to reverse, which is sending us higher, making it much less transitory. Then the headline CPI, looking at reopening and stay-at-home components. So the stay-at-home components have gotten essentially flat, but that reopening is actually a negative drag. So we increased as reopening stuff has come down, which again is showing it is much less transitory. It is not just because we're reopening. It's not just because of this. There is a lot behind this that has a lot of sticking points, which is why. So median CPI headed for over 4% territory, according to the adjusted NFIB or the small business indicator. Very hard for the Fed to continue the transitory talk as this continues to go up, and we will clearly take out the highs that we saw from since 1998. And looking at the used car prices that have since reversed higher. And again, we'll back to the setting a new all-time record on used car prices. This is, again, going to just continue to drain those savings, continue to drain a lot of those that excess capital that these individuals have, which is why when you look again at that urban consumer equivalent rent of residence, this is going to pull higher while jobs still show some of these adjustments. So when you look at job openings, so when you look at unemployment, we're still at that 4.5%, but job openings tick down, but still elevated as people are quitting their jobs. Why? They want better work-life balance. They want more opportunity. They want some of these other adjustments, which again is making some of these shifts in general, which again, they're hoping that they're able to get some of these additional jobs. They're hoping that if you can quit, well, there's more jobs available. And the quit rate is at the lowest income, because if you're locked in, say you were hired pre-pandemic at $16 an hour, and your job is being done across the street for $20 an hour, and there's openings, well, of course you're going to jump. You are absolutely going to make that move. And that's what we're seeing. And a lot of these quits are happening at that lowest quartile as they try to get the higher price, which again is creating this competition, driving up that lowest quartile rating. Then when you look at the former employees are reluctant to go back to their old jobs. So you're still seeing people that are reluctant to go back because jobless people who are prepared to go back to their old jobs on the same conditions has dwindled. No, it continues to become a much bigger setup. And the question is because they were unhappy, because they didn't get paid enough, or because they want a better or different schedule. And these are things that continue to play out when you look at work from home, not work from home, and how is that going to be a driving indicator with the people quitting at that elevated rate, taking the chance, or at least quitting to take a job that they already that they've already received. So then when you look at the job openings, as we said, job openings ticked down in August for the first time this year to 10.4 million versus 10.95 estimate, and was 11.1 in the prior month. So you're starting to see that come down, but again, people are quitting, going to move over. So quit rates increased to a record 2.9%, hirings down from 4.6% to 4.3%, separations up from 3.9% to 4.1%. So again, you're starting to see that mobility in the system. Then when you look at small business optimism, you can see that it continues to weaken. What are they seeing? They're seeing wages go up. They're seeing their employees leaving, having to pay more, all the while their prices continue to get worse. So when you look at that and layer it in, so small business optimism down to 99.1 versus 99.5 estimate. Last month, it was 100.1. Unfortunately, the outlook, the orange side, has fallen deeper into negative territory to the worst point since December of 2012. Firms still struggling all around with labor, higher wages, vacancies, which is why you continue to see this outlook getting worse. Even though the current optimism is still elevated, you're seeing the future general business conditions worsening because price plans for the next 3 months. A record share of businesses are boosting wages and plan to keep doing so in the months ahead. The cost of labor is becoming more and more of a problem, which is why they have to push more pricing. Will the consumer accept a continuously higher price as those compensation plans continue to move up to meet that shortage, which is when you look at small businesses, again, that compensation plan, pricing plans for the next 3 months, this is where we keep seeing these pressure points again, inflation is far from transitory. The question is, when does it stop? It's when the consumer stops accepting these prices. So then when we look at the outlook for general business conditions, outlook for conditions fall to the 5th lowest reading on record. So taking it out a bit further, this is the 5th worst it's ever been on the small business side, to give you an idea of how people are viewing the underlying economy. And what is the driving impact? The quality of labor remains small businesses' most important problem. Worries, it's above worries over taxes, followed by government red tape, then inflation, which actually moved lower because they're just worried about how do they get labor given where these prices are. And again, this is becoming the much bigger focus on how do you pay these individuals more as you're getting squeezed. All the while, contribution of reopening versus non-reopening. Reopening was a drag, as all non-reopening continues to be the driving factor, which is creating some of this movements where the job openings hard to fill reached a new record at the small business side, even as small business hiring plan index came down, because they're trying to hire, but they can't. So they're planning a bit less because they just can't afford it, which is why some of these job openings are going to continue to be hard to fill. As we get these shifts in the change in labor force since January 2020, we're still well below normal. Women ages 20 to 54 is at the worst, but men and women are falling. Women are falling faster. And again, we're continuing to see this slowdown in people coming back into the workforce. So this is a breakdown of, again, demand, inflation, wages, and just underlying jobs as these friction points continue to crop up throughout the economy, again, weighing on some of this growth as we go through not only really Q4, but really into Q1 of 2022 as well. Now that we've talked about that, we want to shift to Europe and look at some of the issues that have brought down some of the growth expectations over the next quarter.